Today we're going to start on Amid Beis by Gufa. Amr Shimon ben Lakish. That's 32B, and um that's 4, 8, 9, 10, 11 lines from the bottom. Do we thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day? In this list of our learning, we should have the Beis Hamikdash immediately. I'm not sure if I have to step out today to do that attendance. We'll see. Text me. Okay. Gufa. Gufa means that we're going to re-examine something that we learned before from Amiroim. And Shimon ben Lakish is an Amira. He's a friend of Rabbi Yechanan, living in Tveria. Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish. Reb Shimon ben Lakish says, "Shachar asakana v'achkach nichba re'ek ksher." He says like this: that if the neck is shechted, you shechted the trachea, and somehow the lung gets punctured after the trachea is shechted, before the veshet is shechted. So in other words, you're still middle of the, if the lung gets punctured, then the animal's a treifa, and you can't eat the meat. It was sick. That's the halacha. You can't eat the meat. If after you do the shechita, then you can cut the lung up. Of course you can eat it. You can cut it up. If there's punctured, it's no problem. It's shechted already. Let's say it's in between the two pipes. You shechted the trachea, but not the esophagus, and then the lung gets punctured. So Reish Lakish's logic is that once the trachea is shechted, then the lung, which is basically attached to the trachea, is disconnected, and the shechita is already effective on it, and it's not considered part of the animal anymore. And it's like as if the animal is like a basket that's now containing in it the lung, but the animal, the living animal, is the veshet, is the esophagus and the inner organs, the other inner organs, not the lung. The lung is already severed, so the lung, there's no trephus by the lung anymore, because it's command the manach b'dikula dami. It's as if it's just contained in a basket. It's not part of the animal anymore. It's been disconnected. That's a statement of Reb Shimon ben Lakish. Amar Rava. Rava comes along and says, "La yamar Reb Shimon ben Lakish ela bereya." Reb Shimon ben Lakish's statement is that when you shecht half the shechita, and then you puncture the lung of the animal, that's by the lung. The logic is, like we said, that the life, the vitality, the life of the lung is dependent on its attachment to the trachea. But let's say you would puncture the intestines, the stomachs, then that would be a different story, because that's still part of the animal. Okay, so we're limiting Rish Lakish's din to just the lung, because that's what was cut first. Because the trachea was cut first. Maskefla Reb Zera. Reb Zera doesn't understand Rish Lakish the way Rava does, and he asks. Now, there's a little bit of a problem, because Reb Zera doesn't really communicate with Rava. Reb Zera is a friend of Rabba. And some have a girsa to adjust it to Rabba, and we're mentioning here Rava. If you adjust it to Rabba, it fits much better. Anyway, whatever the case is, Reb Zera has a question. Reb Zera's logic is different than Rava's logic in the din of Rish Lakish. Rava's logic in the din of Rish Lakish was that once the trachea was cut, so then the lungs are just being held in a container and they're not part of the animal anymore. And so that would immediately make a difference, logically make a difference between the lungs or the bnei me'ayim or the stomachs. Reb Zera has a different shot. Reb Zera says that the reason for Rish Lakish is that once it's partially shechted, it's not really alive. It's only half alive. In the halachas of trephus won't apply to an animal that's half alive. So according to Reb Zera, it doesn't matter if it's the lungs or if it's the bnei me'ayim. He says once you permit trephus because the shechita was half done, you see, a treifa would affect a living animal. But here, where the animal is half shechted, the treifa doesn't affect it anymore. So mali b'rei, mali b'nei me'ayim. Okay, that's Reb Zera's argument to Rava. He has a different way of looking at it. However, Hadabei Rava, Rava, I'm sorry, Hadabei Reb Zera. Reb Zera retracted from his question. And the way we see this, you have to bear with me for a minute over here. By Reb Zera, because Reb Zera had a question. Nikvu b'nei ma'ayim. Nikvu b'nei mayim, bein siman l'siman ma'or. Reb Zera had a question. And we're going to analyze this question, and we're going to say, based on the question that Reb Zera says, obviously he retracted from his independent way of thinking about Rish Lakish, and he actually thinks of Rish Lakish's din the way Rabbah thought of it, the way Rabbah thought of it. And it's based on this question, because Reb Zera had a question. If nikvu b'nei me'ayim bein siman l'siman mahu, let's say the intestines get a hole in it in middle of the shechita, while the shechita is being performed. It was being similar. You did the trachea, and then you do the esophagus, and the b'nei ma'ayim, and then the intestines are punctured in between the two. Now that's really the discussion here between Rava and Reb Zera. Rava would say that it's treif, and Reb Zera would say that it's Rava would say that it's treif, and Reb Zera would say that it's not. And now we see that Reb Zera has a question about this. Now, if we analyze his question, we're going to see that he actually holds like Rava, because mi mitzvah of siman rishon siman sheni l'tar midei nevela eloi. You see, there's two dinim that take place by the shechita. One is that it's not a nevela, and one is that you can eat it. Now, when you shechted the first siman, so you were doing here two things. It wasn't going to be an avela, and you'd be able to eat it. By the time you get to the second siman, you see you're not going to be able to eat it. So what's the shechita now? The shechita isn't now of the second siman of the veshet, of the esophagus, is only going to accomplish one thing. It's only a shechita that's going to help, that it's not going to be an avela. So the question is, if you have two simanim, and one accomplishes two things, and one accomplishes one, will the second one be mitzdarif to the first one for only for the one item, for the one halacha that it's still good at? So mi mitzdarif simrishon simrishon l'tar midei nevela eloi. Okay, now I already see what's happening here. That Rish Lakish, that Reb Zera has no question about if it's asel achila. He has no question about that. His whole question is it going to be an avela? So we see that he's already retracting from his statement that there's no treifus in the Bnei Mayim once one is shechted, and rather he's going to learn like Rava. Rava held that it was command manach b'tikula. The whole reason why there's no treifus in the reya is because the reya is already severed, and it's just like being contained in a basket. It's not even part of the animal anymore. However, the Bnei Mayim is, yes, well, there will be trips. Okay, whatever the case is, when Reb Zera asked this question, V'amrina, we said, Lav haina d'boy Ilfa. This is what Ilfa asked. Now, Dr. Stein, this is to start cheering for this. Haitzi Uberes Yodeh ben Simon LaSimon. This is by the Ben Pekua. We know that if an animal is shechted, and when they open up the animal, they find that there was a fetus inside, that fetus doesn't need shechita. That's because it was in the animal, it's considered part of the animal by the shechita, so it gets permitted with the shechita of the mother. Let's say it started to be born, and it sticks out its hand. That's a whole issue. That hand is not going to be permissible, and you won't be able to do a shechita on it. That hand is going to be have to be severed and not permitted to eat. Let's say they started to do the shechita, and the uber puts out its hand in middle of the two simanim. So that's exactly what's happening by Reb Zera's question. The lung not the lung, but the intestines gets punctured between the two simanim. How do we view that? So the question was like this: The are we going to say that we know that the siman rishon was going to permit it to be eaten? Siman sheni would only be permitted to be mitar midei nevela. And the question is, do you combine the two when the second siman isn't as effective as the first one? will that at least combine for the one part that it still is effective? Or do we say that it's finished? It's not the same thing. It's not considered a shechita like the first simon. So what did we say over there? Rashi says, Upashit Hasam. Rashi says, that mitzdarf simin rishon simin shin lahat hashar v'uber ba'achila lo yasim etam min nevela. We say that for sure it should permit it to be not that it's not a nevela. That it's not a nevela, that the hand won't be a nevela. Now, if we take it back to our Gemara, which we're talking about Rish Lakish, if there's a hole in the intestines, so we can answer as well that it's going to work to help for the that it's not going to be a nevela. Now, ad kam la yibayla all time nevela. This is the Gemara concluding its proof that Reb Zera was really chayzer from his shita, because the sole shaila was only, is the animal going to be a nevela? But abachila asura, but everyone agrees that for achila it's not going to work. It's going to be considered a treifa. So this is exactly the way Ravas learned Rish Lakish, not the way Reb Zera learned Rish Lakish. And because Reb Zera had this discussion and his whole question is only about nevela, not about achila, that means that Reb Zera retracted from his statement and he's following Rava. Amli Ravacha bar Rav.
Wait, can I ask a question? Because you lost me here. So the end result as of this moment is that everyone agrees that the animal is okay to eat?
The ubar, 1 second, there's two cases here. Are you talking about the uber or are you talking about the punctured intestines?
No, I'm talking about the shechita of the animal without the puncture of the intestines.
So it's actually, everyone's going to agree when the animal is shechted halfway, and then the intestines get punctured.
Right.
So we're going to consider it a treifa. Reb Zera didn't do that at the beginning. Reb Zera originally said that once you shecht half of it, it's the life force is so diminished that treifas don't matter anymore. That was originally Reb Zera's assumption. Rava's assumption was that once you shecht half of it, so whatever was connected to that pipe is considered severed, and treifas don't matter to that. But the rest of the animal that wasn't shechted, whatever's connected to that pipe, is still going to be treifas. And Reb Zera now agrees to Rava. So we're still going to have the loss of treifa. Yeah. Okay. So now Amalei Ravacha Barav.
Wait. I don't know. I'm sorry about that bus that started beeping. If we're talking about a ben Pekua, which is obviously what the second case is, that's not even analogous, because the yotze, the limb that he stuck out, would never be allowed to be eaten, whatever you want to call it. So I don't see the analogy here between the punctured stomach and sticking out the limb, where if the behema, the mother of behema was kosher, then the limb is irrelevant anyway, because that would never be machshir.
Yeah,
so I'm not following.
I'll give you that. I'll set it up. I'll set it up better. Set it up better here. What happens is I have two parts to the shechita: the first siman and the second siman. The first siman is accomplishing everything. It's going to be mutabachila now. As you're shechting it, it's going to be matara from nevela. That's the first siman. The second siman, because something is disrupted in between, the second siman is only accomplishing half. It's only going to be matar midei nevela. It can't be matar for achila. That's the that's the setup when it comes to the punctured intestine, because it got punctured in between. Now the second siman is only half effect. Question is, if a second siman being half effective, if that's mitzdarif, if that combines to the first siman to now be one whole unit, to be a shechita, to accomplish at least half of what a shechita should accomplish, which is to be matar from nevela. That's the question by of Reb Zera regarding the intestines. Ilfa was a friend of Rabbi Yechanan. He has a question about if the stuck out limb, the stuck out yadai, the arm of the ben Pekua, is in between the shchita. Will the second half of the shchita at least help to be mitar that limb from being an avela? Just like we know that it's not going to be mitar for achila, but the first half of the shchita was going to do achila and nevela. Second half of the shchita maybe it can only do nevela for nevela. So we're going to say now that if the first half of the shchita, if the second half of the shchita is effective on what's left of the uber, so it can also be effective also on the limb that's sticking out, that it's not going to be nevela. Yeah, you follow? It's the setup is the second half of the shchita dropping half of its function and still being effective, at least on the second half, on the other half. Yeah, that's what we're doing. Whatever the case is, Ravacha, but yeah, is it clear, Dr. Stein?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. But
Okay. So Ravacha bar Rav says to Ravina, how do you know that Reb Zera changed his mind? Maybe he didn't change his mind. It's like a devil's advocate. Maybe Reb Zera never changed his mind. Reb Zera l'dvarav de Rav Kamar Leile Sfirle. Maybe Reb Zera was only asking his question according to Rava. I Tvataka hold that it's mutter. According to you, what would you say about matar from nevela? I know you hold that it's a treifa, but would it help to be matar from nevela if the intestines get punctured in between the two simanim? I don't hold of this, but according to you, that you hold that it's not going to be mutter ba'achila, Reb Zera say I would hold that it's mutter ba'achila, but you say that it's not going to be mutter ba'achila. But what about nevela? He was just playing with Rava's shita, which he doesn't actually hold up. All right, and that was Ravacha bar Rav to Ravina. That must be an earlier Ravina. And maybe not, maybe a Ravacha bar Rav. Who's Ravacha bar? We have a Reb Chia bar Rav. I gotta check up what generation that is. Okay. Now, Amalei Ravacha bar Yaakov. Amar Ravacha bar Yaakov. Ravacha bar Yaakov says, yeah. Went to Abaye. He went to learn by Abaye. The Gemara tells us in the Gemara Kedushin. Shema mina mid Reb Shimon ben Lakish. We have a very interesting halach here. Based on what Reb Shimon ben Lakish says, that when you do a shechita and the as you're shechting it, parts of the animal are becoming shechted, even though the rest of the animal is still alive, and the parts that are getting shechted are already considered separated from the animal, and there's no halachas of treifas applying to them. According to that, then he says like this, that you can invite over a Jew to eat intestines, but you can't invite a non-Jew. My timer. What's the reason? You can invite him to drink wine, maybe, but here we're saying you can't invite him to eat the meat, the inside of the animal. My time. Yisrael de b'shchita talia milsa. When it comes to a Jew, so once the shechita is done, the animal is permissible. I'll tell you like this: in Australia, the health department has this rule: they don't allow shechita. They require that you need to shoot the animal in the head with this with this gun that it's not a bullet, but this thing like pops out and then you push it back in. So the way they do shechita there is they do shechita, they finish the shechita, and then this guy from the health department shoots it in the head. They do the shechita first, and then this shilas about malicha afterwards, because if it gets damaged like that, will the malicha work? But whatever the case is, why are we allowed to do that? The animal is still convulsing, because we say once the shechita is done, the animal is permissible to eat. The shechita was done. We do it afterwards. That doesn't affect the shechita. There's shilas about the malicha, but the shechita was done. We have this rule that the shechita is done, the shechita is mata, it's only for a Jew. For a non-Jew, the animal has to die. Now, even though you did a shechita, but the animal is still convulsing, and that could still be life. If that's the case, then according to Rish Lakish, it says once the shechita is done, then this part of the animal is the parts of the animal that are severed based on the shechting. The lungs get severed as the trachea is shechted. The innards get intestines get severed as the esophagus gets shechted, and the animal is still alive, which means that basically the lungs and the intestines are Aver Menachai according to a non-Jewish law. According to Jewish law, it's not Aver Menachai. It's the animal's already shechted. It's fine. According to non-Jewish law, it's Aver Menachai. So you can't invite a non-Jew over and serve him Aver Menachai. Now, for you, it's not Aver Menachai, but for him, it is Aver Menachai. It's a wild statement, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov is saying. By might you saw the beschita telling me also given the kashchita malaisa ishtrilu. It's permissible. You don't need shchita. By a guy, you don't need shchita. The misa tell you milsa. What makes it considered permissible to eat to death? Because you only need that it's not Aver Menachai. So Hanik Aver Menachai dame, but these are considered that they're separated from the animal while it's still alive. Amar of Papa. Rav Papa, hearing this, says, "Have you seen the Kamei Rav Acha Bar Yaakov?" I would say, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. This is, I think in the Gemara Kedushin, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov sent his son to Abaya to learn. He saw that he wasn't learning well, so he says, "You know what? You stay here and take care of the business, and I'll go learn because I learn better than you." So Gemara learns from that who comes first, you or your son. It depends. If your son is better, it can learn, then he's first. But if not, then you come first. That's the discussion over there in Kedushin. And then it says, I think that Rav Acha Bar Yaakov went to learn by Abaya. And his name was Yaakov Baracha, his son was. So anyway, that's a story with the demon with 7 heads. And if you remember that they all fell off. Rav Papa is a student of Abaya. And Rav Acha Bar Yaakov is the student of Abai, also but a friend. So Amar Rav Papa, have you seen the Kamei Rav Acha Bar Yaakov? I was sitting in front of Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, and I wanted to tell him, do you have anything that the Jewish people are allowed but non-Jews are not allowed? You would assume that non-Jews have less halachas and the Jews have more halachas. We don't go the other way. I don't say non-Jews can't eat this. Remember, when I was a kid, I went to shopping with my grandmother, and she said, "Can I get this?" I said, "No, it has to have the kosher symbol." So the OU, the OK, or something. Anyway, I'm in line, and there's a person of color behind us, and they're holding something that had a kosher symbol. I said, "But they're eating something that's kosher." And they said, "Oh yeah, they can have kosher and non-kosher. We can only have kosher." To me, I wanted it to be exclusive, like the kosher's for us. You can't for the house, you can't eat it. Anyway, the way it's working over here is that Rav Papa's logic is that the non-Jew should be permitted to have everything that we can have. We're more restricted. So, but Rav Papa wanted to ask this question. But I didn't ask the question. Because I understood that Hatay Makamer, that he gave a reason that this has to do with that for them the halachas is different. So I didn't ask that question. There's a Tosfos, that goes through some amazing examples, if you're interested, of cases where things would be usher to a guy and mutter for a yid. He asks like these questions. Starts off with Yifas Tayar. He thinks it would be usher for a guy. It's only mutter for a yid. And he goes through how this is supposed to work. Anyway. Back to the Gemara. It says Tanya Delek Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. You have a brisa that goes directly against Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says that a non-Jew would not be allowed to eat intestines or lungs. No kishka for the non-Jew. Hareitza lechol. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says like the brisa says like this, not like Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. Hareitza lechol mi behema kodim shetetzi nafshe. Someone wants to eat from an animal, we'll see in a minute why that he would want to do that. If he wants to eat from an animal while it's still alive, so what should he do? Right by the shechita, you're looking for a place. You see, you have to really skin the animal to get the meat out. But because you did a shechita there by the neck, so you can cut a piece right off from the neck, neck meat. You take the neck meat, and then you salt it, and you wash it. You get and while the animal is still alive, you'll be able to eat that meat once it dies. In other words, midrabanan, or maybe even midaraisa, you have to, even though you've cut things off, but you're not allowed to eat it yet. You have to wait till it dies. I don't know if remember people used to eat goldfish in the 60s. They would take goldfish, eat live goldfish. Anyway, I don't know if that's allowed. I think while it's still wiggling, I think it's a problem. I'm not sure. But by an animal, you can't eat. You have to wait. Rashi quotes like Seichel al Adam. You can cut it off. It's not even menachai, but you have to wait until the animal dies until you start munching. You start eating this. So what you do is you cut a piece off. You wait for the animal to die, and it's not considered even menachai even for a guy. That's what it says. For a Jew or a non-Jew is allowed to eat it. It goes against Ravach Yaakov. Messiah lay l'Ravidi Baravin. You have support for Ravidi Baravin. What did we quote from Ravidi Baravin? This is a support for Ravidi Baravin. We're about to quote Ravi. Dam Ravidi Baravin, Am Rav Yitzchak Barashian, Haretza Shiyavri, someone that wants to get healthy. Chaytich kazayas basar mi beis shchitas shel behema malcha yafa yafa medicha yafa yafa mantin la chetitz nafshech revchem echad yisram matarim. But this is the new health diet. If you want to eat, you want to get healthy, then you take a piece of meat from while the animal is still alive, which means after the shechita, but before the animal is while it's still moving after the shechita, and then you just salt it and you can eat it. And a Jew and a non-Jew are allowed to eat it, which means that we're rejecting the statement of Rav Bar Yaakov that would be considered Ever Menachai. Okay, now the next sugya is a discussion about Tumah and Tara. Sometimes people get lost in this, but let's see. There's a sheichet behema chayav oif liyatzimem dam. Someone shechts an animal. And notice that it says a chaya as well, a wild animal, which the Gemara is going to explain is a proof that we're not dealing with kachim here. We're dealing with the chulin, because it says the word chaya. And there's no sacrifices that are brought from wild animals. There's no deer in the Beis Hamikdash. There's animals, there's cattle, and there's sheep like that, and there's also birds. But here we throw all three together, so we're dealing with chulin. Somehow there was no blood that came out of the shechita. Maybe it frightened the animal or something. Somehow there was no blood by the shechita. Maybe you cut everything. You didn't cut the arteries. Somehow there's no blood. So it says ksherim. It's still a good shechita. You don't have to be worried about eating wet foods. There's the rule is that we wash our hands for bread, and then on Pesach night we wash our hands when food gets wet as well. So why all of a sudden we're washing for wet food? Well, the truth is, Alter Rebbe holds that we're supposed to wash the whole year as well. If you have wet fruits, wet grapes, or even a piece of meat or something, that the only thing is the reason why we don't wash our hands like that is because usually that's eaten with a fork. Food that's normally eaten with utensils, and you wouldn't have to wash your hands for food that's not eaten with utensils that's wet, then you wouldn't have to wash your hands. Same halacha would apply. But here, we're saying is that because it didn't get wet, this food didn't get wet. If you would eat it directly like this, roasted now, you don't cook it in a pot, but you would roast it or something, or maybe eat it raw, then you could eat it with your hands without washing your hands. Usually you have to go to the sink and wash 3 times, because if you're eating bread, if food gets wet. But here you don't have to. Reb Shimon says no. Reb Shimon says that the shchita itself, if the shchita itself can make this animal into edible food, it also makes it into food regarding tuma. So in other words, it's he says migu, that just as it turns it into, the shchita makes it that it's not even menachai and it's now edible, it also makes it food regarding tuma. That's Reb Shimon's opinion, and you don't need any liquid here. The shchita itself is machshir, prepares it to make it susceptible. Okay, Taima, the Gemara explains the layatza me'em dam. The reason why you don't need to wash your hands is because there was no blood. Hayatza me'em dam, but let's say there was blood, then you can't eat it without washing your hands. You have to, before you eat meat with your hands, you have to wash your hands. It says, 1 second, amai, why do you have to wash your hands? Yadayim shniyasin. The rule is that hands, there was one of the decrees that was made, rabbinic decrees, I think in the attic over there, one of the decrees was made was that the hands are like a sheni latama. A sheni means if it touches something else, it would make it into a shlishi. Now a shlishi is only for truma, and revi is for kaidesh. It can extend more when things, the holier they are, the more extend. But here we're dealing with chulin, and there's no such thing as a shlishi for chulin. So your hands can't make the meat impure. So what are you worried about? We're dealing with chulin. 1 second. Who says we're dealing with chulin? Maybe the Mishnah is talking about kachim. And if the Mishnah is talking about kachim, then we understand the difference between if it is wet or it's not wet, because your hands are a sheni, and by kachim for sure there's a shlishi. Who says we're dealing with chulin? It says, well, the ktani chaya, because one of the cases was it says chaya. Obviously, it's dealing with chulin. There's no such thing as a chaya that's kachim. Bila bekachim chaya bekachim yika. Is there a wild animal that we bring as a sacrifice? Besu ibekachim. Another proof. We have a few proofs there. Ibekachim, if it's dealing with kachim, kiliyatzim dam ksher. So why do you say that it's kosher? The shechita is kosher when no blood comes out. Why do you sacrifice an animal and you shecht it? It's huatzim ladam mutzach. Of course, it's not kosher. It's you need the blood to sprinkle the blood. So it can't be dealing with kachim. That's our second proof. Besu, another proof is ibekachim kiyatzim dam mimachsher. And if blood does come out, would that blood make it mukhshel lekabel tuma? If we're dealing with a sacrifice. Reb Chia Barabba is the major student of Rabbi Yochanan. He says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Minayin ledam kachim sheina machsher. Blood, there's 7 liquids that are machsher. Yad shachatam is the acronym, is the mnemonic. Yad is yayin, dalet yad, dalet is tvash. Shachat is shemen, cholav, tal is dew, oil, milk, and dew, and dam is dam, and the mem is mayim. So those are the 7 liquids that they said. 1 second, one of them is dam. Says, yeah, but that's only dam. That's a specific dam. That's not by dam kachim. It says the blood is spilt on the ground like water. Then you're supposed to cover whatever. You don't drink it. Rather, you spit it. You spill it on the floor. It's only blood that you spill on the floor that would be comparable to water, and therefore it's susceptible to tumah. But blood that you have to collect in a keli is not susceptible to, which means it's not susceptible. It doesn't make other foods susceptible to tumah, which means that the Mishnah that says that because it's dry, it's not susceptible to tumah, but if it would be wet, it would be susceptible, is obviously not dealing with kachim, because by kachim, the blood doesn't make it susceptible. It's a third reason. Besu, fourth reason, I don't even need the blood to make it mukhshel lekabel tumah by kachim. I have a rule, the kaimal and chibas hakodesh machsheres. We have a rule that to make something susceptible, it has to be prepared in a certain way. It has to get wet to make it susceptible to tumah. When it comes to kodesh, because kodesh is so special, you don't need all of those other preparations. The chibas kodesh, the chibas, like endearment, like the preciousness of kodesh makes it susceptible already to that. It's even without getting wet. So the whole halacha doesn't apply. So obviously we're dealing with chulin. That's the proof. We had 4 proofs of it. Rav Nachman. So now our question is, so what's the point of it being susceptible and not susceptible? Your hands can't make it tummy anyway, because your hands are only a sheni, and chulin doesn't have a shlishi. So, it goes down a step. I'm Rav Nachman, I'm Rabbi Baravu. Rav Nachman says the name of Rabbi Baravu, which is very common. Rav Nachman says the name of his father-in-law. So, hacha bechulin shalakhan bekesef meiser skina d'leikar Rav Meir. We're dealing with meiser sheni, and meiser sheni does have a shlishi. And now you have a concern, that if it's going to be wet, then it's going to make it tamei, puzzle it's called. And if it's not wet, then it won't make it puzzle, because we're dealing with meiser sheni. You redeemed your grain that you need to take from meiser on money, and with that money you bought animals. This animal is now meiser sheni. You're eating it in your shalayim, and you have to make sure that if it did get wet, then you have to wash your hands before you eat it, and you don't have to wash it. Not like Rav Meir. It's not. Start in the Mishnah. We're on the next page. Lam Gimel base 33b. Kolatain bias ma'im divrei seifrim. Anything that needs to be washed, that needs to go into water for rabbinic reasons, because of decrees. For example, the hands or other hands are automatically, or you always have to wash them because we think that they could have touched something, or any utensils that got wet from other liquids, those also are considered tamei. And anyone that goes into a bath of mayim shuvim, of drawn collected water, mayim shuvim, not a mikveh, is tamei. All these are rabbinic. All of these things, metami asakodesh, all of these rabbinic laws, they could make you have to recognize the words over here are metame and paisel. Metame means that it makes it tamei enough to make something else tamei, and paisel means that it makes it tamei only enough that it itself could be tamei. Yeah, it's sort of like when you have a stamp and you stamp something with ink. So you stamp, and then you take that paper that you just stamped and you put it on something else. So sometimes it depends how liquid, how wet it is, if it can make the next one. So mitame means that it could go from this to that. The tumah could spread from one to another, and paisel means that it's itself and it doesn't extend anymore. So. So, metame es kodesh, these things will make kodesh tamei, which means that anything that needs to go in water. Let's talk about the hands. The hands are a sheni. They could make kodesh tamei, which means that kodesh could now become a shlishi plus a revi'i. Upaisel es truma, and it can make truma tamei only till a shlishi. Umutar b'chulin ub'maiser, and it's totally permissible. Chulin and maiser, it can't do anything to it because it's a sheni and there's no shlishi. By chulin and maiser, divrei Rav Meir. Chacham and maiser and maiser say no. By maiser there is, which means that we have an opinion here that says that by maiser sheni, that's taken to Yerushalayim, has a certain holiness. It has a shlishi. Okay, so we have an answer. How did we have an issue over here of meat getting wet, and when dealing with chulin, because it's not really chulin, it's really maiser. Maskevler Rav Simon Barashi. Rav Simon Barashi has a question. Mimai, how do you know that that's what we're dealing with? Dilma, who says that touching meiser is going to invalidate it, is going to make it impure? Maybe the Chachamim hold that you're not allowed to eat meiser if it's a sheni, but it doesn't mean that it's going to invalidate. Maybe it's a special din in achila, not in negia. Of menegia the meiser v'achil d'chulin pligi, but everyone agrees that touching meiser and eating chulin is no problem. Baha negia he, and over here we're talking about negia. Going back to our Mishnah. Midiktani nechalam b'yadayim masayv. You see, what we could answer to Rav Simi Barashi will say, he wants to say that it's only a problem of eating, not a problem of touching. We'll say, well, so what? Our Mishnah is talking about eating. And we say, are you allowed to eat it? He says, no, our Mishnah is not talking about eating. Our Mishnah is talking about touching and not eating. Well, where do you see our Mishnah is not? It says, v'nechalam b'yadayim. It is eaten with tamei hands. It was talking about eating. Talking about the dry shechita. It says, no, it's not talking about eating. It says it is eaten. It doesn't say that he eats it. It says ne'achalan, it is eaten in the passive, which means that maybe someone's feeding it to you. Even though his hands are tamei, which means that the one that's eating it is not tamei, the one that's touching it is tamei. How do we know that the Chacham that argue on Reb Meir would hold that touching it would be a problem? Elam Rav Papa says, Hacha b'yadayim tchilas askinan. Papa says, here we're dealing with the hands are a rishon. Hands are a rishon. The whole premise that we had a mistaken premise. We said hands are only a sheni. You see, the rule is like this: that a person could become tamei. It could be very tamei. It could become touch of sheretz. Then it would be a rishon latama. The sheretz would be an avatama. It could have gone into a house of a corpse. It could be an avatama. The person could become tamei, and then there would be an issue. But the wording of the Mishnah was yadayim asayvus, the hands are tamei. How do the hands become tamei and not the person? So we're dealing with only a very unique halacha where only the hands are tamei. Now, how does that happen? Well, that's the rabbinic law of the hands being tamei, which the hands are shnias. So comes along Rav Papa and says, no, we're dealing with another halacha where the hands are a rishon. So where do you get that one? That's Reb Shimon ben Elazar. That's the opinion of Reb Shimon ben Elazar. The Tanya Reb Shimon was taught in the Brisa. Ein yadayim tchilas l'chulin. Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Mishum Rameh, yadayim tchilas l'chulin. The Brisa says that there's no such thing as hands being a tchila, a rishon for chulin. And Reb Shimon ben Elazar says in the name of Reb Meir, we actually think Reb Shimon ben Elazar is a student of Reb Meir, that he says in the name of Reb Meir that yadayim tchilas l'chulin, that they are considered a rishon. Shnias l'truma. Now, what it means, shnias l'truma, means that it can go two steps for truma. Hands can go two steps for truma. They can go one step. No, it can go one step for chulin, because if your hands are a rishon, so chulin can become a sheni. It can go one step for truma, which means now it can go to a shlishi, and for kachim maybe it would go. It would be considered. It doesn't say whatever. Okay, Gemara has a question on this. It says tchilas l'chulin in l'truma. What do you mean? It's more tamei. You're calling it a rishon for chulin, and you're calling it a sheni for truma. It shouldn't work like that. If it's a rishon, then it should be a rishon for everything. Zachi kamer tchilas af l'chulin, shnias l'truma in l'chulin light. What we mean is that it's even for chulin, it's considered tamei. But of course, for truma, it's tamei, because even if it would be a sheni, it would be tamei, and it would give impart tuma. But for the concept of a sheni would only apply to truma, but not to chulin. Gemara says, "Miyika yadayim tchilas." Do we have such a concept where the hands could be a rishon? We just resolved it by making a statement. But where do you get this from? That the hands and not the body should just be tamei? It says we have such a concept. The Tanya was taught in a brisa. If someone sticks his hand into a house of tzaras, the hands become tamei, they become a rishon. The Rabbi Kiva, the Chum say yadav shniyas. The Chum say the hands are a sheni. The kuli alma, everyone agrees. Everyone says that just because you put your hands into the house of tzaras doesn't mean that your whole body's tamei. But we have a machlekes here. Rabbi Kiva would hold mar savar yadav kegufa shavina rabbanan. The rabbinic law is that they made your hands like as if it's the body, and they made it as a rishon. And they say that no, your hands are just still regular. You didn't enter the house of tzaras. So we said over here that we're dealing with yadayim are rishon. The Gemara says, let me just see how this is working. Gemara asks, this is. So we said that it's the opinion of Reb Shimon ben Elazar that says that Yadayim are Tchilas L'chulin. Reb Shimon is the name of Reb Meir. Gemara is asking now that why do you have to say it's Reb Shimon ben Elazar, who's a student of Reb Meir, you heard from Reb Meir? We could go straight to the source. We could go to Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara calls him Rabbi Akiva Stimasa. Rabbi Akiva is as the anonymous one knows. Everything follows Rabbi Akiva. Go straight to Rabbi Akiva, looking for Rabbi Akiva. Dam Yadayim Tchilas Haven. We can do it like that. Gemara says, Dilma. We don't know what Rabbi Akiva is referring to. Maybe when Rabbi Akiva says that Yadayim are Tchilas, maybe he's only referring to Truma and Kachim. But Avol Chulan Shnias have it. But maybe Rabbi Akiva would hold for Chulan it's considered a Sheni. Okay, now, let it be a Sheni. But Rabbi Akiva holds that there is a Shlishi for Chulan. Ditanan. Because we have a Mishnah, it says Bay Bayayim. Remember the Bay Bayayim? Means anything that was said on the day that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah became the Nasi. That Bay Bayayim, Darash Rabbi Akiva taught after they got rid of from Gamliel. It says Kol Klei Cheres Yitma. Anything that's earthenware, that's clay becomes Tami. Tami Lai Nemer Eli Yitma. Doesn't say that it becomes Tami. It says Yitma. Yitma means Tame would be it is Tame. Yitma would mean he is Tame, or it is he will be Tame. But it's reading it as I think like Yitame, like will cause Tame. The Tame Acherim, that it could even make something else Tame. Limit al Kikar Sheni, Shoyser Shlisha Bechulin. So we have a regular answer. We don't have to say that it's Tchilas. We could say that it's a Sheni. Tchilas means that it's the Rishon. We don't have to say that it's an original Tama. We can say that it's a secondary Tama, but it continues to Shlish. We have another answer. It says, Dilma Hani Mili B'Tuma Daraisa. Maybe that would only be if the Tuma was a Tuma Daraisa. Aval B'Darabanan Loi. But by rabbinic Tuma, no. For example, over here where the hands are Tame, then maybe we don't say that there's such a concept of the Shlishi for Chulin. Maybe the rabbinic Tama only goes to Truma and Kachim. Okay, let's leave it right here. We're up to Amar Rabbi Elazar. Yeah, and it's about 10 lines from the bottom. Okay. Good Shabbos, everyone.